I am Nephilim. I have came down to the daughters of men.
In the beginning of the ancient world, before the first great flood washed across the earth, a line was written in the book of Genesis that has puzzled mankind for centuries. It is a single sentence, hidden like a shadow in the early chapters, yet powerful enough to stir fear and wonder in every heart that has read it. It speaks of beings called the sons of God, who came down to the daughters of men. From this union, a race unlike any other was born. They were not like ordinary men, nor were they angels of heaven. They were something between something greater, something terrifying. They were the Nephilim, giants of old, mighty men of renown. Who were these sons of God? What force compelled them to leave their heavenly place and cross into the world of men? And why did their presence bring forth a generation of beings so different, so feared, that even Scripture calls them mighty beyond measure? These are questions that echo through time, and to find their answers, one must step into a world that existed before the flood, a world darkened by mysteries, lit by the footsteps of giants. The earth at that time was not the quiet place we imagine. It was alive with voices, with power, with beings who walked as kings, yet did not belong to the dust of men. Ancient writers believed that the sons of God were watchers, angelic beings sent to oversee the earth. Yet their eyes did not remain pure. When they looked upon the daughters of men, they saw a beauty that stirred desire. They abandoned their place, cast aside their obedience, and took for themselves wives among humankind. From their forbidden union came children who towered above men, who hungered not only for bread, but for dominion. These children, called Nephilim, grew into legends. They were said to be taller than the tallest man, stronger than the fiercest beast, their hands able to bend metal and crush stone. To shepherds, they were shadows upon the hills, moving like mountains come alive. To villages, they were gods walking in flesh, demanding food, tribute, and loyalty. To warriors, they were nightmares on the battlefield, for no blade seemed sharp enough, no spear long enough to bring them down. Yet for all their might, they carried within them the curse of their birth, the mark of a union never meant to exist. The people of that age whispered in fear. Stories spread of villages flattened beneath their feet, of voices so loud they could be heard across valleys, of eyes that glowed in the darkness like burning coals. Some said the Nephilim built cities whose stones no man could lift. Others claimed they feasted upon mankind itself, consuming flesh and hunger that could not be satisfied. Were these tales exaggeration, or were they echoes of truth, preserved in the memory of survivors who lived long enough to tell them? Even the scriptures do not dismiss them as fable. They are called mighty men of renown, heroes whose names once carried weight across the land. Yet their fame was built on fear, their strength a burden upon the earth. The sons of God had brought forth something unnatural, and the balance of creation trembled beneath it. For in giving knowledge, in granting power, in sharing the essence of heaven with the dust of earth, they had changed mankind forever. But not all agreed on what the sons of God truly were. Some argued they were angels who fell from grace. Others believed they were rulers of old, mighty kings who claimed to be descended from the divine, taking women from among their people to birth dynasties of giants. Still others whispered that they were spirits, not bound by flesh until they chose to step into the mortal world. Each version carries mystery. Each holds fragments of forgotten truth. What unites them all is the terror of the Nephilim, who became the living proof of that union. Imagine a world then forests untouched, rivers unbroken, mountains rising higher than eyes could see. And in this world walked men, women, and children, tending their crops and herds, looking up in awe as giants passed by like shadows against the sky. What could a father do when his family was threatened by being twice his height? What chance did warriors have when their spears barely reached the chest of their enemy? The Nephilim were not simply taller men. They were something else, something set apart, and their very presence inspired trembling. The ancient stories say they were skilled not only in strength but in knowledge. The sons of God, it is told, brought secret wisdom from heaven. They taught men how to shape weapons from iron, how to mix charms, how to read the stars. They taught women enchantments and arts unknown before. At first, this knowledge seemed like a gift, but gifts from forbidden hands bring only sorrow. War spread, greed flourished, and violence became the song of the earth. The Nephilim, born of this forbidden union, stood as both symbols and leaders of this new age of corruption. The more they grew, the more their hunger spread. They were giants in flesh, but also giants in desire. Lands were taken, kingdoms razed, altars built to honor their power. In some lands, they were worshipped as gods. In others, feared as monsters. Yet their names lingered, carried by those who lived under their shadow. Perhaps the memory of these beings is why every culture speaks of giants, from the titans of Greece to the frost giants of the north, to the massive beings described in the lands of Canaan. Could it be that all these stories are fragments of the same truth, each echoing back to the Nephilim of Genesis? Still, the question remains, what do they look like? Some believe they were simply larger men, taller by a few cubits, stronger than any hunter. Others imagine them as beings of mixed nature, with eyes that shone unnaturally, with voices that could shake the air, with strength beyond human measure. Perhaps they bore the beauty of their angelic fathers, but with the raw strength of their human mothers, a fusion that made them both terrible and mesmerizing to behold. To see one, the stories say, was to never forget. It was not only their size that stirred fear, but the weight of their presence. Men felt small in their shadow. Women trembled before their gaze, and entire villages could be silenced by the sound of their footsteps. Their laughter was thunder, their anger a storm. To defy them was to invite ruin, and yet to serve them was to live under chains. Humanity was trapped between awe and terror, unable to escape the beings who walked among them. The rise of Nephilim brought not only fear, but despair. For how could mankind survive when the very children of heaven walked upon the earth? How could men claim dominion over creation when giants ruled its fields and mountains? The balance was broken, the world groaning under corruption, and in the heavens judgment stirred. But before judgment came, before the flood swept away all living things, the Nephilim's story spread. Their names became legends, their deeds carved into memories of nations. Some remembered them as heroes, mighty men who defended cities and ruled with wisdom. Others cursed their names as tyrants, destroyers who devoured the innocent. Whatever truth lies behind these tales, one fact remains certain. The Nephilim were real enough to be remembered, feared enough to shape the stories of countless generations. Now the mystery remains. Were they truly the children of fallen angels? Were they kings who carried bloodlines unlike any other? Or were they misborn from fear, magnified through time until they became legends too vast to be ignored? The scriptures give only fragments, a sentence here, a phrase there, as though even the sacred texts fear to speak too much of them. Yet that silence speaks louder than words. For what kind of beings must they have been that even the Bible leaves their stories shrouded in mystery? The Nephilim stand at the edge of history and myth, their footsteps lost in the flood, their voices silenced by time. And yet, even now, they remain unforgettable. Perhaps it is because mankind has always feared what is larger than life, what breaks the boundaries between the mortal and the divine. Perhaps it is because deep within, we know the world once held beings whose presence made men tremble. The line in Genesis may be brief, but its shadow is long. It hints at a world where giants walked among men, where heaven and earth met in forbidden union, and where the children of that union changed history forever. Their story is not finished, for it leads into floods, battles, and echoes across cultures. But it begins here with a single question. Who were the sons of God? And what did their children, the Nephilim, look like that their presence could strike fear into the hearts of men? The world before the flood was a place wrapped in mystery. It was not the quiet world we know, with rivers flowing gently and fields bending softly in the wind. It was a time when the earth trembled beneath the weight of giants, when the skies seemed closer, and when the voices of beings beyond human measure shook the valleys like rolling thunder. Ancient texts whisper those days, when the Nephilim walked upon the land, their presence too great to be ignored, their shadow too heavy to escape. Farmers in their fields saw them from afar, towering above the trees, their forms cutting against the horizon like living mountains. Shepherds on the hills felt their steps echo through the ground, as if the very earth recoiled at their touch. To some, they were protectors, beings whose strength could tear away predators and enemies alike. Yet to others, they were destroyers, forces that could crush homes and lives with the weight of a careless hand. Their voices carried far, deep and resonant, as though the air itself bent to carry their words. When they spoke, valleys listened. When they shouted, storms seemed to answer. Their weapons, forged with knowledge not yet meant for men, were said to be heavier than any mortal could lift, blades longer than a man's height, shields as broad as city gates, spears tipped with stone or metal sharp enough to split even the hardest rock. Imagine the fear of standing before such a figure, a warrior who towered over the tallest soldier, who wielded weapons too massive for even 10 men to carry. No wall could stop them. No fortress could hold them back. To face a Nephilim in battle was to stand at the edge of doom itself. Yet not all feared them. Some people looked upon these giants with awe, as if gazing upon gods who had chosen to walk among mortals. They offered gifts, built shrines, and sought their favor. Crops and herds were laid before them in hopes of gaining protection. Entire villages bent their knees, believing the Nephilim could shield them from rival tribes, wild beasts, or even the wrath of nature. To live under a giant's protection was to live in safety, but also in submission. Still whispers spread, whispers that their blood was not pure, that their birth was a union never meant to be. The sons of God had taken daughters of men, and from their joining had come beings too great for the world to endure. People began to believe that the blood of these giants carried corruption, a poison that stained not only the land but the very soul of humanity. For though they were mighty in strength, their hearts were heavy with pride, their desires unchained, their hunger unending. The earth itself seemed to groan beneath them. Crops failed under their demand. Herds dwindled beneath their appetites. Families trembled at the thought of offering too little to their towering rulers. And when hunger gnawed deeper, some whispered that the Nephilim turned to darker feast flesh, taken from the very people who once called them protectors. Fear spread like smoke. Could such beings be trusted? Could such power remain upon the earth without tearing it apart? Some called them heroes, others called them tyrants, but all agreed on one thing. The Nephilim were unlike anything the world had seen, and their presence cast a shadow that grew heavier with each passing year. Those shadows reached far. They stretched across valleys and into the hearts of men. Children who grew up in their shadow learned fear before they learned hope. Mothers prayed that their sons would never be taken to serve the giants, that their daughters would never catch the eye of those who claimed blood from heaven. Kings trembled in their thrones. For what crown could stand against a being who stood twice their height, whose arm carried the weight of nations? Yet for all their might, the Nephilim carried within them a secret weakness. Their very existence was a defiance of the natural order. They were born of two worlds, but belonged fully to neither. Their size set them apart. Their strength isolated them. Their hunger made them feared. Some longed for acceptance among men, but found only fear and hatred. Others reveled in the terror they inspired, embracing their role as overlords of the earth. And so the world became divided. Some saw the Nephilim as saviors, others as monsters, and others still as cursed beings who should never have been born. The earth became a stage where awe and terror walked hand in hand, where giants ruled but never truly belonged. Violence began to spread. The Nephilim, with their strength and weapons, led armies of men into wars greater than the world had yet seen. Rivers ran red with blood. Cities burned beneath their fury, and kingdoms fell before their might. To them, war was not survival but sport. To them, conquest was not necessity but destiny. They believed themselves chosen, born of heaven and earth, masters of all that lived beneath the sky. But their pride was their downfall. For the more they conquered, the more they consumed, the more the world cried out. The cries of the oppressed reached the heavens. The blood spilled upon the ground cried louder than the voices of those who had been silenced. The corruption of the Nephilim was no longer hidden. It was carved into the earth itself, etched in sorrow and ruin. Stories tell of villages wiped away overnight, of entire valleys left desolate where giants had feasted, of mountains scarred by their battles. The world became a place of chaos, where humanity no longer ruled its own destiny. Men were as dust beneath the feet of those who should never have been born. Still, there were some who resisted, brave men and women who refused to bow, who whispered of a day when the giants would fall. Their resistance was small, their strength limited, but their hope endured. They clung to belief that no matter how tall the Nephilim stood, no matter how mighty their weapons, No being could stand against the will of heaven forever. Yet for now, the Nephilim walked unchallenged. Their shadows stretched over every land. Their names carried in fear across every tongue. They were the rulers of the age before the flood, a race too great and too terrible for the world to bear. The people of that time lived under constant fear, knowing that their lives were never fully their own. Each sunrise could bring the approach of giants. Each nightfall could echo with their laughter. Even the stars above seemed dimmed by their presence, as if the heavens themselves recoiled at what had been unleashed upon the earth. And still, the questions haunted mankind. Were the Nephilim sent as punishment or as proof of forbidden desire? Were they truly the children of heaven and earth, or kings who claimed blood too high for men to question? Whatever their origin, the truth was undeniable. Their size was unmatched, their strength overwhelming. But their greatest power was something far more enduring. It was a fear they inspired. Fear that lived in the hearts of men long after the footsteps of the giants had faded. Fear that shaped the songs of survivors, that etched itself into myths that carried forward through generations until even now, the word giant awakens awe. The Nephilim did not simply walk the earth. They ruled its memory. Their shadows lingered long after their bodies were gone. Their legacy was not just stone or blood, but fear itself, a fear that still whispers through history like a voice too heavy to silence. The world before the flood was not as we imagine. It was a world of giants, of shadows, of fear that lived deeper than the soil and louder than the thunder. And in that world, humanity stood small, trembling, uncertain of its place beneath the sky. But the Nephilim's true power was not just in their size. It was in the fear they inspired across the earth. The story of giants did not end with the Nephilim of Genesis. Their shadows stretched far beyond the valleys of Canaan, far beyond the rivers where the first families tilled the soil, across distant lands, in kingdoms separated by deserts and seas. Stories rose of colossal beings who ruled with power too great to forget. These tales, scattered like broken fragments of a once great memory, whisper of a chain that binds the midst of many nations into a single echo, the echo of giants. In the lands of Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates carved life into the soil, the Sumerians spoke of beings called the Anunnaki. They were described not as men, but as half-gods, rulers who descended from the heavens to guide and command. Their statues, carved in stone, showed figures towering above ordinary men, robed in splendor, carrying tools and weapons that glimmered with mystery. To the Sumerians, these beings built the first cities, taught the first laws, and shaped the course of humanity. Yet beneath their golden crowns lingered questions: were they gods? Or were they giants born of a union that had once before shaken the earth? In Babylon, stories echoed of Gilgamesh, the mighty king whose tale has survived longer than the walls of the city. He was described as 2/3 divine and 1/3 human, a warrior of immense strength whose presence bent nations to his will. His journeys across deserts, his battles with beasts, his quest for immortality, all spoke of a figure larger than life. But behind the poetry lies the question: was Gilgamesh remembered as a man, or was he another fragment of the old memory, a shadow of the Nephilim written into the annals of Mesopotamian myth? Travel westward, and the Canaanites told their own tales of giants who walked like lords of the earth. They spoke of Rephaim, spirits of ancient rulers, and the Anakim, warriors whose size struck terror into Israelite scouts. These giants, feasting in their halls like kings, demanded offerings from the people around them. Their voices carried to the hills, their laughter was like drums of war, and their presence haunted the land. To live near them was to live in fear. But their hunger was vast, and their thirst for dominion unending. The mountains of the Levant bore their stories, carved in whispers of tribes who swore they saw figures taller than the walls of their villages. Mothers warned their children not to wander, for giants could appear from the shadows of the hills. Shepherds watched the horizon with trembling hearts, hoping the shapes they saw moving across the distance were not men, but mountains. Yet too often, those shapes moved closer, and villages fell silent beneath the weight of giants. Further south, across the deserts of Egypt, legend spoke not of men with crowns, but of rulers whose very monuments defy belief. The pyramids stand even now, massive stones cut and set with precision beyond understanding. How did the people of sand and sun raise such towers? Some whispered that the pharaohs commanded not only men, but giants, being strong enough to lift stones no mortal could carry. Could the builders of those monuments have been descendants of Nephilim, their strength preserved in bloodlines hidden beneath royal crowns? The hieroglyphs carved into the walls tell of gods who mingle with mortals, of kings who claim divine birth. Perhaps these were more than claims. Perhaps they were fragments of truth wrapped in sacred script. Even beyond the heart of the ancient world, stories of giants arose. In the far lands of Anatolia, myths spoke of great builders who shaped mountains into fortresses. In Greece, legends told of titans, colossal beings who fought against the Olympian gods. In the frozen north, sagas remembered frost giants born at the edge of creation. Across oceans, among the native peoples of the Americas, stories lingered of sky people and giant bones unearthed from the earth. Could all these stories, from such distant corners of the world, be nothing more than imagination? Or are they scattered memories, each preserving a piece of truth that giants once walked everywhere? The farther one looks, the more the pattern appears. In every land, in every age, people remembered beings larger, stronger, and stranger than ordinary men. They built cities, ruled kingdoms, and left behind ruins too great for common hands. Their names shifted with tongues, their forms changed with cultures, but the essence remained the same. Giants walked among them. Yet the stories did not speak only of power and splendor. They also told of ruin. The half-gods of Mesopotamia brought wisdom, but also war. The warriors of Canaan brought fear, but also devastation. The builders of Egypt raised wonders, but also carried secrets too heavy for men. And the titans of Greece, though mighty, fell in battle against the gods who replaced them. The pattern was always the same. Giants rose, giants ruled, and giants fell. Perhaps these tales are like echoes carried across mountains, faint but unmistakable. Echoes of the first giants, the Nephilim, whose memories spread as survivors carried their stories into distant lands. A family escaping the flood, a wanderer crossing deserts, a tribe resettling after war. Each carried with them the memory of towering beings who had once ruled. Over time, those memories became myths, shaped by culture, bent by time, but always carrying the same heart, that giants once lived among men. And if the Nephilim were truly the source, then the ancient world was bound together not only by rivers and trade, but by fear. Fear of the mighty, fear of the unknown, fear of beings who were too much like gods but not enough to be divine. A chain of stories stretches across history, unbroken by distance, unshaken by time, linking Mesopotamia to Canaan, Egypt to Greece, and beyond. It is a chain that still rattles in the memory of mankind, a reminder that the world was once shared with giants, but in their greatness lay their curse. For giants were not born to endure. The same pride that lifted them high also made them fall. The same hunger that gave them power also destroyed them. Their towers reached too far, their kingdoms too wide, their desires too heavy for the world to bear. And as their shadows grew, so too did the weight of judgment. The higher their towers climbed, the closer their downfall drew. Long before the floodwaters rose, before the towers of giants crumbled, there were whispers of beings who descended from the heights of heaven. They were not men, nor were they like the Nephilim. They were watchers sent to look upon the earth, to guard, to observe. Yet what began as guardianship turned into rebellion. For these watchers looked upon the daughters of men and desired them. And in their desire they abandoned their place in the heavens and crossed into the realm of flesh. It was said that their descent was not quiet. The sky itself seemed to burn as they fell, a host of shining figures stepping down onto the mountains of the earth. The ancient book of Enoch names them Azazel, Semyaza, and others whose memory lingers like smoke. They came not as enemies at first, but as teachers, bringing secrets of heaven hidden from mankind. At first, it seemed a gift. To men, they gave the knowledge of weapons, how to shape iron into blades, how to harden bronze into spears, how to forge armor that could not be broken. The art of war, once unknown, spread across the tribes. Men who once fought with stones and sticks now carried swords that glimmered in the sun. Kingdoms rose in power, armies multiplied, and the soil of the earth drank more blood than ever had before. To women, they gave secrets of beauty and enchantment. They taught the mixing of paints with the eyes, the weaving of charms for the heart, the crafting of bracelets and ornaments that dazzled in firelight. They taught herbs that could heal and herbs that could harm. They taught words that could bind and words that could deceive. What seemed like wisdom became a chain, for beauty was twisted into temptation and enchantment into control. To nations, they gave the knowledge of the stars. They revealed the movement of the heavens, the courses of the sun and moon, the turning of seasons. They taught men to look upward and measure the sky, to seek meaning in the constellations, to divine omens in the movement of stars. The Watchers opened a door to mysteries not meant for mortals, and mankind stepped eagerly through it. But every gift carried a shadow. With iron came endless war. With beauty came envy and lust. With enchantments came deception. With the reading of stars came the worship of false gods. The earth, once simple, was now heavy with corruption. Villages grew into kingdoms, kingdoms into empires, and each one carried the stain of forbidden knowledge. The Nephilim, children of this union, rose not only as giants in body, but as giants of influence. They ruled with weapons forged by secrets. They conquered with armies strengthened by knowledge. They demanded worship, using beauty and charm to bind entire peoples in loyalty. They raised monuments, not to the true creator, but to the Watchers who had given them power. The world bent beneath this weight. Where once men tilled the soil in peace, now they march in war. Where once families lived in simple harmony, now they bent under the rule of giants and the temptation of false wisdom. Violence spread until the world itself groaned in pain. It is said that Azazel, one of the chief of the Watchers, taught men every kind of wicked craft. He revealed the making of weapons and the arts of seduction, turning mankind into tools of destruction. Semiaza, another leader, led the descent itself, swearing with his followers that they would not turn back, that they would bind themselves to this rebellion forever. They came down upon Mount Hermon, a mountain whose very name became cursed, for it bore witness to their oath. From that mountain, their influence spread like fire, and wherever the Watchers walked, mankind followed. Their words carried authority. Their knowledge dazzled. Their presence compelled obedience. Who could resist beings who shone with the memory of heaven, yet walked among men with power greater than kings? But what seemed like power became a curse. For every tool sharpened for protection soon found use in slaughter. Every charm woven for beauty became a snare for greed. Every star observed for wisdom became an idol. The more mankind learned, the more mankind fell. The earth was filled with corruption. The cries of the weak rose to heaven, and the blood of the innocent cried from the ground. Giants marched with weapons forged by forbidden knowledge, their shadows darkening valleys, their laughter echoing in cities set aflame. Humanity's destiny, once shaped by toil and hope, was reshaped by secrets stolen from heaven's vault. Other traditions remember the Watchers not only as givers of knowledge, but as corruptors of creation itself. They twisted plants and beasts, blending what was never meant to mix. They spread disease through unnatural crafts, taught poisons to kings and murder to armies. The harmony of creation shattered, and the world became a place of fear. Imagine living in such a time when the soil beneath your feet could betray you with famine, when the beasts of the wild were no longer the same as they once were, when your rulers were giants carrying weapons no mortal could wield, and when every night the stars above were used to bind nations to idols. The Watchers had promised wisdom. Instead, they had given ruin. The children born of their unions, the Nephilim, became embodiments of this corruption. Their strength was unmatched, but their desires were boundless. They devoured what was before them, not only food but lands, peoples, kingdoms. Their reign was not only one of flesh, but of spirit. They commanded loyalty through terror and worship through awe. They sat upon thrones built on knowledge never meant for earth. And so mankind became a servant to the very beings who were meant to watch in silence. The heavens, however, did not remain silent. Stories tell that the archangels themselves saw what had been done. Michael, Raphael, and Gabriel looked upon the earth and saw it bent under violence, saw mankind enslaved by knowledge, saw creation itself trembling under corruption, and they cried out for justice. The Watchers, once guardians, had become betrayers. Their wisdom had become mankind's curse. Their secrets, once thought precious, had turned the world toward destruction. But judgment does not come in haste. It waits, it watches, it gathers. The seeds planted by the watchers grew into forests of war, rivers of blood, mountains of pride. And those mountains would not stand forever. For every secret carries a price. And the knowledge stolen from heaven was not given freely. It demanded payment. Payment not only from the watchers, but from the earth itself. The watchers thought themselves immortal in influence, untouchable in power. The Nephilim thought themselves eternal in might. Yet the corruption they spread was a weight too heavy even for giants to bear. The very fabric of creation, once harmonious, now strained under the burden. And when the fabric tears, all is consumed. The story of the Watchers is not only a tale of rebellion, it is a warning. For knowledge without wisdom destroys. For secrets stolen in pride always return in judgment. The earth itself, groaning beneath the sins of giants and the rebellion of angels, would soon demand payment. What began as a gift became a curse. What began as wisdom became corruption. What began as guardianship became betrayal. And betrayal carries a price. But such knowledge carried a price, one the earth itself would soon demand. The book of Genesis speaks with a heavy voice. The earth was filled with violence. It was not only the quarrels of men, nor the rivalries of tribes. It was a violence so vast, so overwhelming, that creation itself groaned beneath its weight. And at the heart of this chaos stood the Nephilim giants whose rule cast the world into a storm of war and blood. They were mighty in stature, their heads rising above the tallest of men. Their strength was without equal, their weapons heavy enough to crush stone. But it was not their size alone that darkened the world. It was their pride, their hunger, their insatiable desire to rule and conquer. At first, some saw them as gods. To villages trembling under the fear of raiders, the presence of a giant meant protection. Their immense frames towered like guardians. Their voices rolled like thunder that could scatter enemies. But gods in flesh soon revealed themselves as tyrants. Protection turned to domination. Villages bent their knees not in worship of reverence, but in submission to terror. Others saw them as monsters. Farmers looked on in dread as their fields were stripped bare to feed the endless appetites of giants. Families watched herds vanish, carried off as feasts for their lords. To resist was to perish, to obey was to starve. Their dominion became chains around the necks of humanity. Chains forged not of iron, but of fear. As their power spread, so too did the wars. Tribes rose against tribes, each led by a Nephilim who sought dominion beyond his borders. The ground quaked beneath the march of armies, and rivers turned red as countless men fell beneath the shadow of their battles. Cities built with stone and hope crumbled into dust under their rage. Fields once green with harvest became graveyards of broken weapons and shattered bodies. Imagine standing upon a hill, watching as two armies clash below. Among the soldiers, rising above all others, were the Nephilim, colossal figures wielding weapons no man could lift. Their strikes tore through ranks. Their voices roared commands that bent men to their will. To face such a being was not a test of courage. It was to stand before death itself. The world descended into chaos. War was no longer a rarity, but a way of life. The Nephilim reveled in it, their pride swelling with each conquest. Their names carried on the wind like curses. Mothers wept for sons who marched to battles they could never win. Fathers buried children whose lives had been cut short by the games of giants. The Nephilim's violence was not bound to the battlefield. Their rule infected every corner of life. They demanded tribute from villages, taking the best of crops, herds, and daughters. They built halls where they feasted like kings, while the people around them starved in silence. Their laughter filled the night like thunder, while their subjects whispered prayers of deliverance. And still, the corruption spread. Some giants fought not only for land, but for pleasure. They turned upon one another, their rivalries shaking the earth, their battles destroying everything in their path. Entire regions were laid to waste not by famine or plague, but by the quarrels of beings too powerful for men to withstand. Ancient traditions speak of fields soaked in blood, of valleys echoing with cries of the fallen, of mountains scarred by the battles of giants. Wherever the Nephilim walked, ruin followed. Humanity became little more than dust trampled beneath their feet. But even in their fear, people remembered They carved stories into stone, whispered songs into the night, passed down memories of days when giants ruled with terror. Those stories tell their might, but also their cruelty. They speak of hands that crush walls, of spears that split the ground, of eyes that glow with fury. They speak of men who cried out to heaven, begging for mercy. The violence of the Nephilim was more than physical. It was spiritual. Their pride grew so vast that they began to claim divinity. Some demanded to be worshipped, their names etched into temples, their forms painted upon walls. They sat upon thrones like gods, receiving offerings, commanding rituals, bending hearts as well as bodies. Humanity, already broken in spirit, bowed not only in fear but in belief. And in this belief, corruption deepened. Idols rose, altars burned. The people who once prayed to the Creator now bent their knees to giants who claimed the heavens for themselves. The world was drowning, not only in blood, but in lies. The corruption of flesh, the corruption of spirit, both spread like fire, and like fire, they consumed all they touched. The Nephilim did not see themselves as destroyers. In their eyes, they were kings of destiny. They believed they had been chosen, born of divine blood, set apart to rule without challenge. Their wars, their pride, their cruelty, these were not flaws, but rights. The earth was theirs, and mankind was theirs to command. But the cries of humanity rose louder. The weak cried for justice. The innocent cried for mercy. The blood of the slain cried from the ground. And though the giants seemed invincible, though their violence seemed without end, the heavens were not silent. For in every age, pride brings downfall. The Nephilim's might, their weapons, their kingdoms. None could save them from the weight of their corruption. They filled the world with fear, but in doing so, they filled the heavens with wrath. The book of Genesis says it simply. The earth was filled with violence, but behind that line lies the grief of countless lives, the ruin of cities, the fall of innocence. Behind it lies the story of giants whose pride broke the world. And as the cries of mankind rose, as the earth trembled beneath their endless wars, something stirred beyond the reach of mortal eyes. The heavens had watched long enough. The judgment that had waited, patient and silent, now gathered like a storm. The violence of Nephilim had shaken the earth, and in the heavens, judgment was stirring. The world had reached its breaking point. The earth was soaked with blood, the air heavy with corruption, and the hearts of men turned fully to violence. The Nephilim ruled with pride and cruelty, their wars spreading across valleys, their shadows swallowing nations. Humanity cried out for deliverance, and the heavens listened. What followed was not a whisper, not a warning, but a judgment so vast that it erased nearly everything that walked upon the land. The flood came. It began with clouds that gathered darker than any before. Winds rose, cold and fierce, and the skies churned as if the heavens themselves had been torn open. Then the first drops fell soft at first, but heavy with meaning. Soon the rain poured without end, striking the soil, filling rivers, drowning fields. The people lifted their eyes, and fear gripped them, for this was no ordinary storm. This was a flood unleashed by the hand of judgment. For 40 days and 40 nights, rain fell without mercy. Springs broke forth from the deep, waters rose higher and higher, until the tallest trees were swallowed, and the highest mountains stood like islands in a sea that stretched beyond the horizon. Villages disappeared, their walls crumbling under the waves. Cities sank, their monuments vanishing beneath swirling depths. The world had been filled with noise, of giants' voices, of armies clashing, of men crying out in despair, grew silent, drowned beneath the endless roar of water. The Nephilim, once so mighty, now found themselves powerless. Their size, once their strength, became their curse. They tried to wade to the rising waters, their long strides carrying them above the waves for a time. But the waters did not stop. They climbed higher, rising past their chests, their shoulders, their heads. The giants roared against the storm, their voices shaking the skies. But even their cries were drowned by the fury of the flood. Their monuments, their palaces, their towers built to defy heaven, all crumbled, washed away as if they had never stood. Weapons once thought unbreakable were lost beneath the depths. Thrones of stone and gold were swallowed in silence. The pride of the giants was brought low, not by armies or weapons, but by water, simple water, falling from the sky, rising from the deep, commanded by the will of the Creator. The people, too, were swept away. The corruption that had filled mankind did not escape judgment. Men who had followed the giants into war, women who had bent their knees to idols, kings who had raised themselves as gods, all were silenced by the flood. The world that had been thick with violence was cleansed in one sweeping tide. Yet even in judgment, there was mercy. Noah, a man described as righteous in his generation, built an ark according to divine command. Into it, he gathered his family, along with living creatures of every kind. As the flood waters raged, the ark floated, carried upon the waves like a vessel of hope. Within it lay the promise of a new beginning, the survival of mankind and the preservation of creation. But outside the ark, silence spread. The cries of men faded. The voices of giants disappeared. The laughter of the Nephilim, once loud and unending, was no more. All that remained was water stretching farther than any eye could see. Many have wondered why the flood was so complete, why the judgment spared so few. The answer lies in the weight of corruption. The union of the Watchers and the daughters of men had given birth to the Nephilim, and through them the earth had been filled with violence. Their presence, their pride, their power had bent the world out of harmony. The flood was not only a punishment for humanity's sin, but a cleansing, a sweeping away of the giants whose reign had brought chaos to creation. Yet even here, questions linger. Did all of the Nephilim perish? Did every bloodline vanish beneath the waters? Or did fragments of their legacy survive? Hidden in the veins of men who would one day rise again, the scriptures are silent and full, and the silence itself is haunting. Some traditions claim that not all the giants were destroyed. The descendants of Anak, the mighty OG of Bashan, the Rephaim who dwelt in Canaan. Could these have been remnants of Nephilim's line? If so, then the flood cleansed but did not erase. If so, then the shadow of Nephilim stretched beyond the waters, whispering through history long after the ark came to rest on Ararat. Others claim that the Watchers, though bound in judgment, left seeds of their rebellion in the hearts of men. Knowledge, once given, cannot be fully forgotten. The arts of war, the enchantments, the secrets of the stars, these survived, carried forward by men who clung to what they had learned. And from this knowledge, new giants could rise, not always in body, but in influence and power. The flood changed the world forever. The old earth, the world of giants and endless corruption, was gone. A new earth emerged from the waters, fresh and clean, but carrying with it the scars of what had been. Mountains still bore the ruins of cities swallowed long ago. Valleys still whisper wars fought by beings too great for men. And in the memories of survivors, stories lived on, stories of giants who once ruled and of the flood that silenced them. The waters slowly receded. Land emerged once more, wet and broken, but alive. The ark came to rest, and Noah and his family stepped out into a world reborn. They built altars, gave thanks, and began again. The covenant of the rainbow stretched across the sky, a promise that the world would never again be destroyed in the same way. But beneath the promise lingered the memory of judgment. Every storm cloud that gathered carried the echo of that flood. Every river that swelled reminded people of the waters that once covered the earth. And every tale of giants carried the unspoken question, were they truly gone, or had fragments of their bloodline survived, waiting to rise again in another age? The monuments of the Nephilim lay buried beneath oceans and seas. Their voices, once mighty, were silenced, yet whispers remained. Whispers of bones unearthed too large for any man. Whispers of kings whose stature exceeded belief. Whispers of tribes who claimed descent from ancient giants. The flood was judgment, but it was also mystery. For though the waters washed the world clean, they did not wash away the memory of giants. And as men rebuilt their homes, planted fields, and raised children upon the renewed earth, the shadow of Nephilim lingered. The people knew what had been. They remembered the terror of giants, the corruption of the Watchers, the flood that swallowed everything. And they told their children, who told theirs, until the memory passed into legend. Yet legends have a way of surviving. And so, though the waters receded, though the ark stood on dry ground, Though the world began anew, whispers returned. Whispers that the giants had not been fully destroyed. Whispers that their bloodline, their strength, their pride lived on. The flood was judgment. But judgment is never the end. For even after the waters receded, whispers of giants returned. The waters receded. The ark came to rest upon the mountains, and the world began anew. For a time, silence covered the earth, broken only by the sound of wind across valleys, and rivers carving their paths once more. The age of the Nephilim seemed finished, drowned beneath the judgment of the flood. Yet as generations passed, whispers began to stir again, whispers that giants still walked among men. When the tribes of Israel entered the land of Canaan, they did not find an empty land waiting for their plow and their seed. They found cities fortified with walls that touched the sky, and men of stature so great that the scouts who first saw them returned trembling. They said, "We were like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in theirs." These giants were called the Anakim. Their presence filled the hearts of Israel with dread. The Anakim were remembered as towering figures, men whose size alone could terrify entire armies. To stand before them was to feel small, to feel powerless, to feel as if the days before flood had returned in flesh and blood. Were these not echoes of the Nephilim? Could the bloodline of the giants have survived the waters, hidden and preserved in secret places, waiting for a new age to rise again? The Anakim were not alone. Another name echoed through the hills, the Rephaim. They were remembered as ancient rulers, spirits of the dead, and men of towering stature. Some spoke of their cities, their feasts, their halls filled with laughter that carried for miles. Others spoke of their might in war, their weapons cutting through ranks like fire through dry grass. They seemed to carry the same pride, the same hunger, the same shadow that the Nephilim once bore. And then there was Og of Bashan, a name that even now carries weight in the memory of history. Og was called a giant among kings, the last of the Rephaim. His bed, the scripture's record, was made of iron and stretched 13 feet in length. What kind of man requires a bed of such size? What kind of presence must he have carried, that his name alone caused fear among nations? Og's kingdom was vast, his power unquestioned, his stature unforgettable. To face him in battle was to stand before a living mountain, one whose fall could shake the very earth. For the people of Israel, these encounters stirred haunting questions. Had not the flood destroyed Nephilim? Had not the waters cleansed the earth of their corruption? And yet, here in Canaan, in the very land promised to their fathers, giants still stood. Some believed these were remnants, bloodlines that had somehow survived, perhaps through Noah's in-laws, perhaps through hidden families spared in the flood, perhaps through mysteries too deep for men to understand. If so, then the shadow of the Nephilim had never truly died. It had waited in silence, only to rise again when the tribes entered the land. Others believed these giants were not remnants, but new creations, born of secrets that had survived the deluge. The knowledge of the Watchers, the corruption that once spread across the world, may not have been fully erased. In hidden places and forbidden unions, new giants may have been born, not in the Nephilim of old, but their likeness, carrying the same pride, the same hunger, the same defiance against heaven. Whichever truth one accepts, the fact remains, the giants were there. They stood in the path of Israel, living proof that the age of giants had not been fully washed away. The scouts trembled, the people wept. They asked if they could ever defeat such beings. For what are walls, swords, or numbers when one stands against men twice your height, whose weapons are heavier than you can lift, whose voices shake you to the soul? The fear of giants nearly turned Israel away. When the scouts brought back their report, the people cried out, wishing to return to Egypt rather than face the Anakim. The shadow of giants was so heavy that it nearly drowned the promise of new land. Giants, it seemed, were not only obstacles of flesh, but obstacles of faith. But the giants were not invincible. Og of Bashan fell. His bed of iron remains a testament to his size. But his kingdom was broken, his might brought low. The Anakim, too, once so feared, were defeated, driven from their cities, their shadows scattered across history. The Rephaim, whose presence lingered in both flesh and memory, faded as the centuries passed. Their power was great, but it was not eternal. Yet even in their fall, their memory endured. The names Anakim, Rephaim, Og, they echo through the scriptures, not as myths, but as reminders that the giant of old still walked the post-flood earth. Their size, their might, their pride made them unforgettable, and their defeat made them warnings. Still, questions remain. If they were remnants, how did they survive the flood? Did hidden mountains or distant lands preserve them? Places the waters did not reach? Or did their blood pass secretly through families, diluted but never fully gone, waiting until the right moment to rise again? If they were new creations, then who dared to repeat the sins of the Watchers, to call forth giants once more from unions forbidden by heaven? The mystery deepens when one looks beyond Canaan. Other lands too held memories of giants long after flood. In Greece, the stories of titans and heroes larger than life continued to be told. In the north, sagas spoke of Jotnar, beings of immense power born from the chaos of creation. In Egypt, monuments rose that even now defy understanding. Stones lifted in places by hands stronger than human. Could these, too, be traces of giants who lived after the flood? Could the Anakim and Rephaim be but one branch of greater tree whose roots reached across the world? The giants after the flood were not as many as before, nor as dominant, but their presence was enough to remind mankind of what once was, enough to show that the shadow of the Nephilim had not been erased. Their names became warnings written into the sacred texts, lessons that pride, might, and corruption bring only ruin. And yet, their memory lingers with fascination as well as fear. To imagine men so tall, so powerful, so commanding, is a step once more into the realm of myth and legend. To consider their defeat is to wonder at the hand of heaven, which brought low the mighty and raised up the weak. The Anakim, the Rephaim, and Og of Bashan stand as echoes of an older age, fragments of a story that began before the flood but did not end with it. They remind us that history is not as simple as we believe, that the line between myth and memory is often blurred, and that the giants who once walked the earth still cast shadows in our minds. The flood was meant to cleanse, to reset, to begin anew, and yet, in the very land where a promise was to be fulfilled, giants once more stood in defiance. Their presence is a mystery that cannot be easily explained, a puzzle scattered across sacred texts and ancient lands. To find the truth, one must follow those scattered clues to cross the hills of Canaan, the ruins of forgotten kingdoms, and the stories that still linger on the tongues of nations. The story of giants did not fade with the floodwaters of Genesis, nor with the defeat of the Anakim and the Rephaim in Canaan. Across distant lands and through the tongues of many nations, whispers of colossal beings continued to rise. They appear in myths carved in stone, in sagas sung by poets, in legends passed from fireside to fireside. These tales may seem separate, divided by oceans and centuries, yet they carry a haunting resemblance. Could they be fragments of a single truth, scattered like pieces of a broken mirror across the world? In Greece, the myths speak of titans, beings of immense size and strength, who once ruled before the gods of Olympus. They were said to be the children of the sky and the earth, born of primal forces, their bodies stretching like mountains, their power shaking the heavens themselves. They ruled in an age before men, until Zeus and his siblings rose against them in a war that split the world apart. The Titanomachy, the battle between gods and giants, was remembered as a cosmic struggle, ending with the Titans cast into the depths of Tartarus. But beneath the poetry of myth lies a chilling echo, divine beings joined with mortal earth, giving rise to giants too great for the world to endure. The Greeks spoke also of the Gigantes, the earth-born giants who rose up in rebellion, climbing the very heavens to challenge the Olympians. They were fierce, monstrous, armed with spears of trees and shields of stone. Their defeat required not only the power of gods, but also the strength of men, working side by side to bring them down. Once again, the story ends the same way. Giants rise, giants fall, and their ruin marks the turning of an age. Travel northward, and the sagas of the Norse sing of frost giants. In their myths, before the world was shaped, there was only chaos, ice and fire colliding in the void. From that chaos came Ymir, the first of the frost giants, whose body was so vast that when he was slain, his flesh became the earth, his blood the seas, his bones the mountains, and his skull the very sky above. The frost giants who followed him were enemies of the gods, forever threatening to bring the world back into chaos. They were not merely large men, but beings tied to the very elements, a reminder that creation itself was born from the body of a giant. To the Norse, giants were not simple monsters. They were ancient forces, older than the gods, embodying the wild power of nature, untamed, uncontrollable, and destined to clash with the order of heaven. And though the gods often won, the giants never fully vanished. They lingered at the edges of the world, in mountains, in glaciers, in the frozen wastes, waiting for the day when the last battle, Ragnarok, would bring them forth once more. Far across the seas, in the Americas, stories of giants also took root. Among the native peoples, legend spoke of sky people who descended to the earth, tall and powerful, teaching secrets and demanding reverence. Some tribes told of great bones unearthed in the ground, bones too large to belong to any man. Explorers in later centuries would claim to have found massive skeletons buried in the soil, remains that stirred both wonder and fear. Were these the echoes of ancient Nephilim, preserved in memory and earth alike? Or were they new stories, born from the same mysterious thread that runs through every culture? In South America, the Inca told of Viracocha, a great creator god who fashioned giants in the first age of the world. These giants, ungrateful and violent, turned against their maker, and for their rebellion, they were destroyed in a great flood. The survivors were scattered, and mankind arose in their place. Again, the pattern repeats. Giants bore divine power, corrupted by pride, destroyed by water. The resonance with Genesis is too striking to ignore. In North America, the Paiute people in Nevada spoke of the Sitesich, a race of red-haired giants who were fierce and cannibalistic. They warred with the tribes until finally they were trapped in a cave and destroyed. When explorers later discovered Lovelock Cave, they found strange artifacts and unusually large skeletal remains, fueling belief that these giants were not just myths but memories of real encounters. Even in distant islands, stories linger. In the Pacific, Polynesian myths tell of great builders, beings taller and stronger than any man, who raised stone platforms and monuments that still stand today. In Micronesia, the ruins of Nanmadol rise from the sea, colossal stones stacked with precision, their builders unknown. Some say giants built them, carrying stones heavier than ships across miles of ocean. The echoes stretch further still. In India, the Mahabharata speaks of warriors whose size and power surpass normal men, their battles filling the sky with fire. In Africa, legends tell of the Zulu giants, being so tall they could step across rivers in a single stride. In the Middle East, beyond the story of the Nephilim, Arab traditions remember beings of great stature who lived in ages past, whose bones lay buried beneath the sands. Everywhere the stories appear, always in fragments, always in whispers. Giants who ruled, giants who fought gods, giants who built monuments, giants who fell. Different names, different lands, yet the same story. Could this be coincidence? Could so many nations, separated by oceans and mountains, invent the same tale again and again? Or are these fragments of one truth, scattered by time, reshaped by tongues, preserved in memory because they were too great to be forgotten? The giants of Genesis may be the oldest thread. They stand at the root of a tapestry that stretches across the world. Each culture weaves its part, each adds its colors, but the pattern remains the same. Giants rise in power, giants bring fear, giants are destroyed. Humanity survives, carries a memory, and tells a tale anew. Perhaps this is why the idea of giants endures in the human heart. They are more than myths. They are reminders. Reminders that pride brings downfall, that corruption cannot last, that the greatest of beings still fall before the judgment of heaven. Reminders, too, of the mystery of our past, that the world we walk today may carry shadows of a time when the earth was shared with those far greater than ourselves. In every culture, giants leave ruins behind. Stones too heavy, bones too large, stories too enduring to be dismissed. They are not easily erased, but their presence left scars in both the earth and the memory of mankind. And yet, no matter the land, no matter the tongue, no matter the age, the end is always the same. The giants fall, their pride breaks, their kingdoms vanish. Their stories are told not as triumphs, but as warnings, Yet no matter where their stories are told, they always end in ruin. Legends, though scattered across lands and languages, agree on one truth. The giants, however mighty, did not endure. Their reigns, built on strength, terror, and pride, were always temporary. They stood like mountains against the sky. Yet like mountains, they crumbled with time. Some fell by the hand of heaven, struck down by divine wrath. Others were brought low by mortal heroes who dared to rise against them. And some simply vanished, leaving behind only ruins, bones, and whispers too heavy to silence. The Nephilim of Genesis, born from unions forbidden, drowned in the flood. The Anakim and Rephaim of Canaan fell before the advance of Israel. Their cities emptied. Their kings remembered only in the lines of scripture. In Babylon, the mighty Gilgamesh, said to be two-thirds divine, met death despite his quest for immortality. In Greece, the Titans, who once ruled the cosmos, were cast into the depths of Tartarus. The Gigantes, fierce in their rebellion, fell beneath the thunderbolts of Zeus and the swords of men. In the north, the frost giants, older than the gods themselves, were fated to perish in flames of Ragnarok. It is the same story told in many voices. Beings too great, too proud, too dangerous a world, always ending in destruction. Their falls were violent, dramatic, and often final. Yet their memory endures, clinging to mountains, to valleys, to ruins that seem far beyond human scale. Travel the earth, and traces appear. Stones stacked so high and cut so precisely that no tool of their time could have shaped them. Monoliths weighing hundreds of tons, resting in silence as though placed by hands larger than any humans. Walls stretching across mountains, carved with blocks so vast they defy explanation. Were these the works of men or the remnants of giants who sought to leave their mark before their fall? Bones, too, have stirred curiosity. Stories tell skeletons unearthed, their skulls broader, their femurs longer, their stature towering above any known man. Farmers claim to find them buried in fields. Explorers spoke of them hidden in caves, and chroniclers wrote of their discovery in lands both near and far. Many of these bones vanished, dismissed or hidden, but the stories remain. Each discovery feels like an echo, a reminder that perhaps the giants did not vanish completely, that traces of their existence still lie beneath our feet. Yet their true fall was not only physical, it was moral. Giants, in nearly every culture, are remembered as beings of pride. Their strength was unmatched, their appetites unending, their ambitions boundless. They sought dominion, demanded worship, raised themselves to the place of gods. But pride is always the seed of ruin. The higher they rose, the harder they fell. Their kingdoms toppled, their towers collapsed, their names turned from praises to warnings. Some tales remember giants as cruel tyrants. The Citesage in Nevada, described by the Paiute people as red-haired cannibalistic giants, were destroyed by fire, trapped and wiped out by the very people they once terrorized. In the Inca legends, the giants created by Viracocha were drowned in a flood for their violence and arrogance. Even in faraway islands, giants are remembered as builders of great monuments, yet their stories end with their disappearance. Their works left as empty ruins surrounded by mystery. The fall of the giants is more than history, it is a pattern repeated again and again. Giants rise with might, giants fall with pride, and mankind survives to tell the tale. But the memory of them never fades. Mountains carry their smoke. Legends cling to valleys. Temples whisper their names. The ruins they touch speak without words, their stones heavy with secrets. Explorers who walk among these places feel it. That sense of something greater, something ancient, something lost but not forgotten. It is as if the earth itself remembers, and perhaps it does. For giants left their mark not only on stone and soil, but on the human soul. They live in memory because they were more than flesh and blood. They were symbols of what happens when power breaks its bounds. Their downfall is not only the tale of their end, but a lesson written into the story of mankind. Yet for all their falls, the fascination endures. People still seek their bones, dig through ruins, study monoliths, searching for proof of their existence. And each time a stone too massive is found, each time a story of ancient giants is retold, the shadow of the Nephilim stirs once more. Did they all perish? Or did some escape? fading into caves, mountains, or hidden lands? Did their bloodline vanish? Or does it linger, diluted yet persistent, in tribes and families scattered across the earth? These questions haunt because they are not easily silenced. Legends are not born without cause. They may be shaped, exaggerated, retold, but at their root lies memory. And the memory of giants clings like smoke. It lingers in sacred texts, in myths, in sagas, in ruins, in whispers of explorers who claim to have seen with their own eyes what the world insists cannot be. Even now, people speak of giant footprints carved into stone, of petroglyphs showing beings taller than men, of burial mounds said to hold skeletons too large to belong to mortals. Perhaps these are errors. Perhaps they are deceptions. Or perhaps they are fragments of the truth, surfacing when the world is ready to remember. The fall of the giants was certain, yet their story never truly ends. For though their bodies fell, their presence still stands. They haunt the mountains, the ruins, the bones beneath the soil. They live in the words of scripture and in the verses of poets. They linger because mankind cannot forget what once stood beside them, being so mighty, so terrible, so awe-inspiring, that their shadows stretch into eternity. Every culture tells the story of giants. Every culture tells of their fall. And every culture, in its own way, keeps alive the question of their return. The fall of the giants is not only the end of their reign, it is a reminder, a warning, a mystery that will not die. And so, though they are gone, their story endures. But what do these mysteries tell us about the Nephilim, and why does their story still haunt the world today? The Nephilim remain among the greatest mysteries of ancient times. Their story begins in Genesis, yet stretches far beyond the borders of Scripture. They appear in whispers, in ruins, in myths carried by nations across oceans. They are called the sons of heaven and the daughters of earth, rulers of forgotten cities, builders of monuments that still stand against time. But were they truly the children of fallen angels? Were they kings who claimed divine blood to secure their thrones? Or were they stories born from mankind's awe of the unknown, tales woven to explain bones too large, stones too heavy and memories too strange? What makes the Nephilim unforgettable is not only what they were, but what they represented. They were larger than life in body, yet also in influence. They were giants of flesh, but also giants of pride. They carried knowledge never meant for mortals, weapons forged from secrets, power unchecked by wisdom. Their reign was brief in the span of history, yet its shadow lingers because their story carries more than memory. It carries a warning. Their rise was swift, their downfall inevitable. Floods consumed them, armies broke them, time erased them, yet they left marks no water could wash away. Their ruins remain, their names echo through scripture, their legends revive in sagas. Every culture that remembers giants also remembers their fall. Always pride. Always violence, always ruin. The Nephilim remind humanity that greatness without restraint becomes destruction, that strength without wisdom brings collapse, that pride without humility leads to judgment. Their story is not simply about beings taller than men. It is about the dangers of power unmeasured, of knowledge stolen, of desires unchecked. Perhaps this is why their memory endures, because mankind has always feared not only what walks outside of us, but what dwells within. The Nephilim are not only figures of the past, they are mirrors, showing what happens when might and pride outweigh humility and order. Yet there is also wonder in their story. For who can hear them and not imagine? Who can read of their voices shaking valleys, their weapons bending stone, their stature towering like living mountains, and not feel awe? They are remembered with fear, but also fascination. They awaken in the human heart both terror and curiosity, because they stand at the edge of the possible and the impossible. Even now, explorers claim to find bones too large for men, stones cut with precision no simple tools can explain, ruins that whisper of builders beyond human scale. Scientists debate, historians search, storytellers retell, and each time the mystery deepens. Are these remains proof of their existence, or echoes of imagination? Are the ruins they touch monuments to their pride, or simply the labor of men whose names are forgotten? The answers remain hidden. Yet the questions themselves keep the Nephilim alive. The story of the Nephilim is more than history. It is a thread that ties together myth and memory, scripture and saga, ruin and wonder. It begins with angels and ends with floods. Yet in between it weaves through wars, monuments, and legends too vast to ignore. Perhaps their greatest legacy is not their bodies, but their shadow. The shadow that clings to mountains, to deserts, to seas. The shadow that makes men look up at great ruins and ask, who built this? Who walked here before us? The shadow that makes us dig into the earth, searching for bones too heavy for the soil to carry. The shadow that makes us tell stories again and again, until Nephilim become eternal in memory, if not in flesh. The giants are gone. Their laughter no longer echoes through valleys. Their wars no longer turn rivers red. Their towers have fallen, their kingdoms erased. Yet their presence endures in another way, in stories, in ruins, in the restless curiosity of mankind. As long as we look to heavens and wonder what walks between realms, as long as we see mountains and imagine giants striding across them, as long as ruins rise from the earth with secrets too great to ignore, the Nephilim will never be forgotten. They are reminders carved into myth, reminders that power without wisdom destroys, that pride without humility collapses, that beings who raise themselves as gods will always fall. And perhaps that is why they linger in every culture, every story, because they are more than giants of the past. They are lessons written not in ink but in ruins, not in parchment but in memory. The Nephilim may have fallen, but their shadow is eternal. The story you have heard is one of giants and mysteries, of echoes from Genesis to distant cultures. It is a story that binds together history and legend, fact and faith, awe and fear. The Nephilim walked the earth long ago, but their presence still stirs hearts today. Their tale is not finished, because it continues every time we remember them. If this story has carried you into the past, if it has made you wonder, then let it not end here. Share it so others may also hear the lost giants. Leave your mark as they left theirs, not in ruins or in pride, but in memory, like this story to keep its voice alive. Share it so the legend travels beyond this place. Subscribe to journey deeper into the shadows of history, where more mysteries await. For as long as mankind wonders what walked before us, as long as we ask what lies hidden in ruins and beneath the earth, the story of the Nephilim will live on,